Welcome, Megalithomaniacs. Thanks for joining us for our third Megalithomania podcast that also features on our YouTube channel. Today, we're talking with one of the world's leading researchers into the ancient megalithic sites. It's Howard Crowhurst, who's based in France. He's been living in Carnac for many years in an area which is very rich in megaliths. And he's published many books. He's been involved in 4 different Megalithomania conferences. And most recently, he's published a book called The Megalithic Plan, which came out in early May. And also, he's got a new documentary coming out called Megaliths, The Forgotten World. And so we're going to talk about some of the aspects of his research, but very specifically, Carnac and the way he's applied his geometry or astro-geometry to the landscapes, not only there, but also in Britain. So we're going to quite a lot to get through in this next hour or so. So hello, Howard, how are you?
Fine. Rather hot, but, okay.
It's hot here as well. We've just been out for the last few days, Avebury and Stonehenge with Robin Heath, good friend of yours. Yeah. And it got hot, it got ridiculous. But anyway, I can't complain about that. But you're at Megalithomania. You spoke at the recent conference in early May, online conference, and you gave a lecture about the latest book, about the alignments, the geometry, the metrology that you're finding, linking up all these sites. But it all started for you really in Carnac. So yeah. Can you give us a bit of background about how you got into this whole subject, specifically relating to Carnac?
Yeah. Well, I got into it when I moved here. I moved here in 1985. Nothing to do with the megaliths at that time. I came for a job. And then I discovered the megalithic sites. I discovered the Carnac alignments. I'd kind of vaguely heard of them. But when I saw them for the first time, I just couldn't really believe it. I couldn't believe that they were there and that it wasn't much better known. I couldn't believe that there were no kinds of explanations as to why these massive stones had been lined up like that across the countryside. And I sort of started looking into the official, just the information I could get, and found it totally unsatisfying. And I think it's even got worse since. So once I'd sort of lived that, got this kind of weird feeling that something was not being said, I started getting more and more interested. I linked in with a French association here called AAK, which was an association of students basically who'd come from different subjects, but they'd been linked together by a questioning about the megaliths. So there were astronomers in there were mathematicians, historians, all different kinds of people. And I got very interested in that. And I eventually became vice president of that association. Things changed a lot when Google Earth came out, because up until then, work had been a bit complicated on long distances. The Carnac alignments run for over 4 kilometers. The Erdogan alignments run for about 4 kilometers. Those are long distances to try and work things out on sort of maps with any kind of precision. There was no GPS at the time. I was getting these ordnance survey maps and sticking them together with sellotape and trying to work things out. I even managed to get some high detailed electricity board maps, but it was still all very, it was interesting. Sort of ideas came out a lot, the presence of some geometry was clear. But once Google Earth appeared, everything changed. Suddenly, things became incredibly precise. I was able to see incredible precision over very long distances. highly precise angles to a precision of 100th of a degree over distances over a kilometer. And that changed everything, totally changed the take I had on it, because the high precision made it impossible to just think about early farmers, and just became impossible to take in the sort of general idea we have about this period, this prehistoric period. And it also broke down some limits I'd set myself. You know, you're not likely to look into things if you don't believe they can exist. And suddenly I started looking into things which seemed totally impossible, and found these things to actually be true, which changed ever such a lot, you know. And so basically I discovered that I spent a long time, I'd say I was studying the megaliths here in Carnac for about 18 years before suddenly the penny sort of dropped on one or two things. And then bit by bit, I started being able to understand a bit more what was going on. And basically what I discovered was that these things were built with very, very high precision with respect to the cardinal directions, the north, south, east, west, geographical north. And that these orientations were actually linked to the sun positions and moon positions at the specific latitude of Carnac. And so that got me into looking elsewhere to see if the principles that I discovered in Carnac existed elsewhere. And I've discovered them all over the world, in fact, at all different periods in time, including Tiwanaku in Bolivia, or the Taj Mahal, different periods, exactly the same principles being used, where the latitude, specific sun positions at the latitude give a specific geometry. And it's became clear to me that there was some kind of ancient hidden science, an old language which has spread all over the world, which is known in certain circles. It seems fairly clear that this knowledge has not totally disappeared. So that's it basically, you know, the sort of, but it's, yeah.
So basically, we'll get into some of the more detailed, the geometry, the metrology, and the astro-geometry, you call it. But you know, a lot of people may not have heard or been to Carnac before. So can you? Because I've been there a few times. I've met you, I think, virtually every time I've been there. We've been exploring, and that place, the megaliths there, it's like supersized, isn't it? Everything is just the number of stones there, in the alignments, the quality of the kind of craftsmanship of the placement in the landscape. It's just astonishing. I mean, it's there's one site in Britain that reminds me of Carnac. That's Avebury. Nowhere else kind of has anything like it. Avebury's got the huge stones, the supersized stones, the rough-hewn stones with the avenues, which are like what we find in Carnac. But you know, from your research, you found that much of it's actually gone missing. You know that,
yeah.
And
well, not only from my research. I mean, it's the sort of standard position now is that what's remaining represents about 10% of what was here initially. That is, ever such a lot has been destroyed since the French Revolution. So there are actually records of lots and lots of things that have disappeared. There is written record. There are written records of alignments of 2,000 stones, which have totally disappeared since. And so it's estimated that about 90% has disappeared. Yeah.
And there's a lot left. There's a lot to see still. I mean,
well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's still 10,000 standing stones, over 230 dolmens, massive tumulus, 7 massive tumuluses, and just ever such a lot still here, which, but it's thought that there must have been about 70,000 standing stones initially.
That's incredible.
And people sometimes say, well, if so much has disappeared, how on earth can you do geometry among the monuments, if so much has disappeared? What's interesting is that, first of all, certain parts have been well preserved, like the Carnac alignments have been well preserved because they were well known at the time of the French Revolution, and it wasn't possible for the government and the local farmers and local builders to destroy them. I say the government because the state was in fact the biggest megalith destroyer up until about 1877. They used the megaliths for road building and lighthouse building, all kinds of stuff. And so, of course, if the state was destroying the monuments, then local people would do so also, wouldn't they? But some parts were very well preserved. Some of the biggest parts that are very well preserved. The beginning of certain alignments are still there, and the end of the alignments are still there, which enables you to get a good idea of what was going on. It's certainly not possible to reconstruct exactly what was here 7,000 years ago, because that's the other thing, is the age of the whole place. Because the tumulus Saint-Michel, for example, is dated at 5,000 BC, which is a massive 67,000 ton artificial hill. It's dated to 5,000 BC. The giant standing stone, because we talk about the alignments, but there's a massive giant standing stone called the Grand Menhir Brisé, the great fallen standing stone, which was erected in 4,700 BC, which, and that stone weighs about 350 tons, metric tons. And it was not local stone. It's not local stone. It's now on the ground in 4 parts. And it was about 20 meters. Well, it was 20.4 meters long. And it would have stood a little under 18 meters high. That was taken from, at least we don't know the exact quarry point, but it's a special kind of stone. And the nearest quarry is 15 kilometers as the crow flies.
That's impressive. That is just trying to move that thing. I mean, and the thing that gets me about Carnac and that whole area is that it's not only supersized, it's like bigger than pretty much any other megalithic kind of sites of a similar style in the world. It's also much older. It's at least 1,000, maybe 2,000 years older in some cases. So do you think that's like the origin point of like all this megalithic construction that kind of spread through Europe and around the world?
Yeah, well, it's been shown. There was a study done last year or the year before by a Swedish researcher who collated a whole amount of information. I can't remember her name, but she collated a whole amount of information of dating of different monuments and showed quite clearly that the Carnac monuments are the oldest monuments and that things have spread from Carnac. She shows with the dating system how the further you get from Carnac, basically, the more recent the monuments are. And that has been a sort of accepted thing now. But of course, Göbekli Tepe are megaliths, and that puts a whole new dimension. Until Göbekli Tepe was found, it seemed obvious that Carnac was the center of everything. The existence of Göbekli Tepe is an incredible thing that suddenly puts all that into question as well. It was interesting when Göbekli Tepe was discovered. I think there wasn't a word on French internet there wasn't a word in French about Göbekli Tepe for about 10 years. I was publishing, there was a lot on the internet in English, but there was nothing translated into French. So I was publishing at that time a lot of stuff to talk about Göbekli Tepe and let people know about it. And even in 2010, a lot of people had never heard of it, even people interested in megaliths, you know. And that was really kept silent here because it was a big question for the archaeologists here, you know, what on earth is this thing, these massive megaliths that have been covered over all those years ago. And the same kind of thing happened here. The megalithic monuments here were also covered over in the same way Göbekli Tepe was. The Gavrinis, which is an incredibly incredible dolmen with its corridor and its chamber under a massive stone cairn of a 50-meter diameter. That was actually hidden. The entrance was filled up and the whole thing was covered with stones, and then earth was put on it to make it look like a normal hill. And that was done in 3500 BC. And the same thing was done for the cairn at Kerkado, which is just near the Carnac alignments. I've got an exhibition there this year at the Kerkado. I've got an exhibition with 8 massive, what would you call them? The panneaux in French, 8 sort of boards explaining a lot about the Kerkado alignments. If anybody's coming to Carnac this summer, then come and see us at the Kerkado cairn. Yeah, but that Kerkado cairn was totally covered over again with stone and hidden until it was rediscovered in 1862. So that's rather a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, with Göbekli Tepe, then, I mean, because we're going to get into the whole astro-geometry, the alignments and measurements thing shortly. But have you found anything at Göbekli Tepe in that respect that may prove there's an influence coming from there into the Carnac region? Is there any like geometry, any measurement systems, anything like that?
Yeah, well, not exactly linked to Carnac, but the same geometry links the massive stones at Baalbek to Göbekli Tepe. The massive stones under the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek are perfectly linked to the middle of the Göbekli Tepe mound by what's called a 2x3 geometry. It's a massive distance over an incredible distance that can't possibly be a coincidence. It's precise to 1/100th of a degree. So the same kind of geometrical, those same stones of Baalbek are linked to the Ziggurat by a 5, 12, 13 triangle. And the whole, what was going on in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, is exactly the same geometrical principles as what happened here in Carnac and then afterwards in the British Isles.
So there is some kind of movement, some kind of influence that slowly may have taken place, but it just seems with Carnac that it just went so big, the sites there, so vast, so much work. I mean, the millions and millions of hours of work and quarrying and moving stones. I mean, even how they move some of these stones is just impossible to imagine. I mean, people talk about how difficult it was to move these sort of small blue stones from Wales to Stonehenge. But when we're looking at the size and weight of some of the stones in Carnac, it's pretty amazing. But
well, there is no explanation, in fact, for the giant standing stone of 350 tons. I said it's the closest spot is 15 kilometers away as the crow flies. But wherever the quarry, because it's orthogneiss, so the orthogneiss is a deep rock which comes up to the surface at some points, and whichever the point that this rock comes from, it's not certain which point it comes from. That could be decided now. I mean, with the modern techniques, they could quite clearly see which thing, but for the time being, I don't know about this. But wherever it comes from, it has to go across at least one deep valley. In other words, down a hill and up the other side. And there is absolutely no official explanation whatsoever for the time being, no official theory even, not even a theory of how that stone could have been transported to where it is, on a high point, on a peninsula where there is no orthogneiss. Okay. There's another case on Belle-Île, the island of Belle-Île, which is an island. It's 45 minutes by boat to get to this island from the south of the Quiberon Peninsula. So it's out to sea, it's not. And was found on this island a 25-ton megalith made from orthogneiss, and there's no orthogneiss on the island. Right. So a 25-ton megalith was somehow transported over deep sea out to an island. Now, there's no theory as how that was done.
Okay.
No one is trying to suggest that they put it in a boat and that they had ships that you could put 25-ton, no one is suggesting this. So it's just kept under silence, really. It's really, strange to see how that kind of information, which just won't fit in, we just don't talk about it. It's like, it's almost not polite to talk about it.
That's fascinating. And so before we jump over to your work you've done in Britain, we have the Carnac alignments, we have the multiple parallel rows of huge stones. At the end, they have a cromlech, or kind of part of a stone circle. And these are really like inexplicable. There's multiple ones of these. They go on for many miles in some cases, sort of linking up changing angles as they move through the landscape.
That's it.
But what is your kind of fundamental reasoning for why they did these? And can you just describe them a little bit?
Yeah. Well, the beginning of the Carnac alignments, there are what are called three series to the Carnac alignments. To the west side, which is where you have the big tourist center and where everybody parks, it's the western end called Le Mennec. There are 11 parallel rows of stones. The stones start on a kind of plateau, which is slightly higher, and then the land goes downhill. And so the massive stones are on the plateau, and then as they go down the slope, they get smaller. And that part of the alignment goes for about 900 meters. It changes slightly direction. It has a cromlech at the head. It's not a total circle. It's part of a stone egg, Professor Thom's stone egg, type 1 stone egg. It's very, very precise geometrically, which is designed using two back-to-back 3-4-5 triangles. Now, the stones at the head of those alignments are between 3.50 meters and 4 meters high. And the Mennec alignments have about 900 stones, a little less than 1,000 stones altogether. And they're parallel, 11 parallel rows, so 10 gaps. And the angle of those rows, that's the kind of explanation. When you work out the exact angle of the rows, they have an angle. Professor Thom did with a theodolite, he did a survey of those stones, and he got slightly different angles for the first 7 rows. But if you take the average of his results for those 7 angles, they're very close. I mean, they're only, 1/4 of a degree difference. But if you take the average, you get 18.46 degrees as the average, which 18.44 degrees is the exact angle. This is from east-west, from the east-west. They're inclined towards the northeast at an angle of 18.44 degrees, which is the exact angle of what's called a triple square. If you have three squares side by side and you draw the diagonal, that's exactly 18.44 degrees. Now, with Google Earth, we can check with a theodolite, you're linked to how far you can see, and but with Google Earth, we can check the exact angle from the first stone to the final distance, which in fact, what I've discovered, and which is perfectly clear, but which still isn't told to people and isn't accepted, is that the second series of alignments called Carnac, where again you have a plateau and you have these stones over 3 meters, 4 meters high, those stones are exactly aligned to the beginning of the Lamanic alignments. So if you, with Google Earth, you can trace a line from the first stone in the Lamanic to the first stone in the equivalent line at Carnac. It's a distance of 1,466 meters. And that angle traced on Google Earth is exactly 18.44 degrees over 1,466 meters. And just 1,466 meters is exactly 10 times the height of the Great Pyramid.
Okay. I mean, that's what you're finding. You're finding like the precision placement of these sites, the angles associated with them, and you seem to keep finding that it's linked with these varying squares and the angles within squares.
That's it. Yeah. What I call modular geometry.
Yeah, but it only
works. A number of squares. It's very simple Lego stuff.
But it kind of works. But these kind of things work, in relationship to the astronomy, the sunrises, sunsets,
exactly,
moon rises, and so forth, and so and also at that particular latitude. So you've applied that all over Carnac, all over the megalithic sites there.
Yeah,
found some remarkable things. I mean, it's like there's a whole code hidden within the landscape.
Yeah, it's a language. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, and I think we'll put some images up on screen so people can kind of get a sense of what the importance of this and how this is happening here. But then you kind of applied this, not just to Carnac, but you extended it into Britain. Mm-hmm. And there's obvious connections between these two areas. I mean, even like I said earlier, Avebury is very similar to some of the Carnac sites with the avenues, the big stones, the mega ditches, the henges, and so forth. So what did you notice happening in Britain? When did you start seeing the connection between the Carnac geometries, astro-geometries that you're finding, and those in Britain?
Well, the first sort of link, if I look historically in my research, the first link was when I realized that Orkney was exactly due north of Carnac. And the 1,270 kilometers due north of Carnac, you come to Orkney. That seemed to be a rather strange coincidence. Then when I discovered, what I haven't said for the time being, is why Carnac, you say it's just astounding the amount of monuments there are in Carnac, but what I discovered, what I believe is that the reason for that is that the latitude of the solstice, at this latitude, the solstice angle gives you an exact 3-4-5 triangle. So if you look at the solstice angle like this, and you're looking from here, then this is east-west. So you go 3 north-south, 4 east-west, and 5 is the actual solstice angle itself. So when you have the solstice angle, the 3-4-5 triangle is a right-angled triangle. It's the easiest way to discover to trace a perfect right angle. So it's still used in the building trade. If you want to trace the right angle of a house, you measure 3 units, then 4 units. And when you have exactly 5 between them, then you've got a perfect right angle. That's still used, And so the fact that at Carnac, you have the solstice, because what you have to realize, people talk about solstice as an important moment. It's a very important moment because the sun stops. For about 10 days, the sun will be rising in the same place. Very slight difference over 10 days. And so, whereas the rest of the year, if you look at equinox, then from one day to the next, the sun's moving. It's very difficult to get angles at equinox, but at solstice, it's very easy. And so if you have this sun stopping at 10 for 10 days, you have the solstice angle. If that's a 3, 4, 5 triangle, you can easily find that angle because that's the solstice. Well, then you can perfectly position a perfect north, south, and east, west from that solstice angle. It's not easy to get perfect north, south, and east, west. It's not easy at all. And you say we look at the pole star, but the pole star isn't exactly in the, whereas with this method, if you're at the right latitude, then you look at exactly where the sun sets, and then you can work out perfect north, south, and east, west. And that's very important if you're wanting to start to organize space, because the cardinal directions are the things that enable you to organize things. And what I've discovered is that, I don't know if, I haven't put this in the book about England because it wasn't about England, but I've discovered that the same thing is true, for example, at the Giza Plateau. The solstice angle at the Giza Plateau is another Pythagorean triangle. It's the 8, 15, 17. It's the exact angle of an 8, 15, 17 Pythagorean triangle. So instead of having 12 units, 3 plus 4 plus 5, you have 40, 8 plus 15 plus 17, 40 units. And so again, from solstice, you can work out exactly north, south, and east, west. So that's very interesting. And the builders seem to have attached great importance to the half angle. So east-west is equinox, solstice, right? And you can have half an angle, when the sun has done half the angle. And when it's a 3, 4, 5 triangle, half of that angle is 3 squares side by side. In Egypt, half on Giza Plateau, half the angle of a 5, 8, 15, 17 is 4 squares side by side. And they've actually traced that out, what's called the Kefren Causeway, which goes from the Valley Temple up to the Kefren Temple, the temple at the base of the Kefren Pyramid. That is exactly 14.04 degrees north of west. It's the exact angle of a quadruple square. So in other words, if you take the Kefren Causeway and you draw 4 squares, that will be the exact diagonal, 4 squares placed on cardinal directions. Then the Kefren Causeway is the exact diagonal of that. So in Carnac, it's 3 squares, and in the Giza Plateau, on the Giza Plateau, it's 4 squares. So these latitudes they're exactly the same principles, and these places were quite clearly chosen because of that. They are like sort of special places on Earth. And so, of course, right. So to come back to your question about the link with England, is that I realized that Orkney was due north of Carnac. And then I realized that the solstice angle in Orkney is also a 3, 4, 5 triangle, but this time turned round by 90 degrees. In other words, the 3 side is east-west, and the 4 side is north-south. So you have the same astro-geometry in Carnac as you do in Orkney, except that the 3, 4, 5 triangle has been turned. Now, you know, what kind of chance is there that that's a coincidence, you know, that on a north-south meridian, 2 points have been chosen for the most important megalithic implantations at those specific spots on that meridian. You know, it's obviously linked, especially when you find it, you know, the Maes Hau corridor, its greatest angle, because the corridor has a certain width. If you take the diagonal of that corridor, it's on the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Really, I mean, it almost seems like, I mean, just it appears that the builders, the megalith builders in Carnac, seem to went as far north in Britain first, really, before they started coming south again into Britain, because the earliest megalithic dating has pretty much been found in Orkney now. They found, you know, the first structures. You've got the Nap of Howard, which is 3700 BC. You've got you know, places like the first phase of Maes Hau and stones of Stennes, 3100 to 3300 BC. So it's not as early as Carnac, obviously, but it appears that there was, it kind of jumped from Carnac to the far north and back down again.
Because Carnac closed down in 3500 BC, basically.
Okay.
The building went on there from about 5000 BC to 3500 BC, and then quite clearly things were closed down. The monuments were closed, hidden from view, and people moved out, cleaned up their picnics, because there's no trace of human. There is no trace of human habitation, or that's one of the other things. You see, that the archaeologists have found no trace of human existence in the area from that time. So, you know, you have to go inland by about 150 kilometers and come to about 2000 BC before you find the first traces of dwellings. Yeah. So, they cleared up their picnics. I mean, there were rising sea levels. It's thought that perhaps they were dwelling on the right by the sea, and so it was all covered over, you know, but whatever. But
so what else have you found? What else have you found then? I mean, because, you know, you've got, like, you know, we've got Orkney. There's some interesting things going on there. I mean, do you think that? Well, like what I said, do you think that was one of the earliest places they were doing this astrogeometry in the landscape, or is there seems to be evidence of it all over Britain? You found it linking, you know, major sites like, you know, the Rudston monolith, the tallest stone in Britain, which is very Carnac.
Silbury Hill. Silbury Hill is incredibly important. Yeah. Can
you give us a bit of a background, you know, maybe just about what you found in Britain, so some of the most important aspects?
Yeah. Well, the dating's all rather complicated, isn't it? I mean, we date the oldest things we've found. But you never know, of course, if there was stuff going on before. When you look at Bryn Celtic in Wales, they found pit holes dating to 5000 BC. And so the site itself was already being used in 5000 BC. Now, we say the monument, Bryn Celtic, dates to 3300, but, you know, people were there doing stuff at that particular spot from 5000 BC. It's just the form that the monument took, which changed. You know, maybe they went from wood to stone or whatever. That's all very, very interesting. So it's very difficult to date stuff really very clearly as far as placing. You know, at Stonehenge, there's the post holes in the car park that are much, much older. They're finding very old stuff at Stonehenge. So things were going on there, you know, ever such a long time ago. And what's interesting, you see, is that it's the place itself which is important, not necessarily the monument. Carnac, the alignments show these angles, but it's the place itself which is the cause of those angles, you know. And so anyway, for me, one of the major Orkney, of course, is incredibly important. Everybody knows that now. But there'd be a lot to say about Orkney. I've done a talk in French, never done a talk in English about it, but I've done a talk in French about Orkney. Very, very interesting, the geometry that links the Ring of Brodgar to the Watchstone. And it's basically the same geometry, that's been used there to link the sites. As far as Silbury Hill is concerned, Silbury Hill is an incredible monument, which is incredibly mysterious. It's another one of these things. It's rather impolite to talk about it because they've never found a chamber. So all the tomb theory won't work. And so if it's not a tomb, what is it? And I mean, I actually read an article recently where quite seriously somebody was suggesting that it happened by accident, that Silbury Hill was kind of built by accident. Somebody built a first thing, then somebody else put something around it, then they put something else around it, and the whole thing kind of appeared by accident. Which shows, how far we can go to try and, get rid of the fact that something was going on, and that we don't know what the hell was going on, really. But Silbury Hill and Avebury, in the book, I do talk about that. You can show the thing. I've got that ready, which is but we can put the image in there. It's the relationship between the center of Silbury Hill and the center of Avebury. It's very, very important. If you can perfectly get the exact center of Silbury Hill and the exact center of Avebury, they can be found quite easily. And the angle between the two is 9.22 degrees. It's exactly 1/4 of the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. And the center of Avebury, the center of Silbury Hill, is exactly due south of the west side of the Avebury henge. And the other side, it opens up with a triple square. So the relationship between Silbury Hill and the Avebury henge is a triple square relationship, like what we find in Carnac, but this time north-south orientated. And if that triple square angle is extended from Silbury Hill, it goes right along the bank of the south of Avebury. If it's extended, it runs up to the highest megalith in Britain, Rudston, many miles away. And then in the book, I explain how, in fact, all the major monuments are linked by the same geometry over incredible distances. Castle Rig is a very important monument. It's a kind of a central pivot between different angles.
Because with Castle Rig and with many of the stone circles in Britain, they just within themselves, as Alexander Thom discovered in the 50s and 60s, have very specific geometry. Some of the geometries, on a very small scale, but you seem to have found the same kind of geometries he was finding, and the astronomy linked with it is on a much grander scale all the way across the country. So you're really building upon the work of Alexander Thom in some respects.
Well, in some respects, the actual sort of modular geometry that was used for landscape, he was very always connected to observation of the sun and the moon, whereas there's stuff going on which doesn't seem to be particularly linked to those relationships. It's kind of modular geometry on a massive scale. And as the British Isles is sort of north-south and quite long, there are angles used which have got nothing to do with the sunrises, sunsets, or the moon or anything. It's actually modular geometry. What I suggest in the book is that globally this was a plan to harmonize the entire British Isles. There was an ancient science which had been understood that massive stones and stone monuments and massive hills placed at certain positions could calm, could we say that? They could calm sort of negative energies and create a positive environment. And that can work on a gigantic scale. So in the book, I quote the Luden Levelist story from the Mabinogians, which was written down around the year 1000, where it's actually written down, that the monuments were built to counteract a struggle that took place between two dragons. One of the dragons comes from the continent. The other one was a local British Isles dragon. And every year on the 1st of May, they kind of hit each other head on, and that created all kinds of terrible vibrations. They say it's like a scream. That's how it's said. A terrible scream, which could send women would become barren and people would go crazy and lots of horrible things will happen. And the whole of this structure of building was built to stop that. And I think this seems to be the case. I think we've actually got proof, quite clear proof that is what was being done. I go into the book a little at Rudston, the biggest earthquake ever found in the British Isles, ever to have taken place in the British Isles, which is, I can't remember now, 6.1 on the Richter scale, or the strongest earthquake to have ever taken place is actually on the latitude of Rudston.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's interesting. So you basically what you're saying is this is kind of this is John Michel's idea of the enchantment of the landscape, which he was writing about from like the late 60s, where he was, he was quite visionary. He was way ahead of his time, and he was like talking about this idea that you just basically said, that a huge, almost like possibly a global effort was to harmonize the landscape, to bring fertility by placing these sites at specific places. Not only the geometry and the kind of precision created the harmony, but also, like you said, the dragons kind of represent the earth energies, and it was like, controlling those and manipulating those, these natural telluric currents. But also, you mentioned the earthquake thing, because even at Carnac, aren't the alignments they're part of a fault zone, aren't they? And and it's suggested that they were placed, partly one of the many reasons I think they were placed there was to harmonize that and to stop so much kind of earthquake activity. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, there's a massive fault line runs right through Brittany, north of Carnac, through what's called the Land de l'Envol, which is, it's higher hills to the north of Carnac, and that's a massive fault line. Now, that was absolutely covered with massive megaliths, which unfortunately have been destroyed. I mean, I've discovered the base of certain of these standing stones, which have been sliced off. And you can see the drilling that's been done and everything. You just wouldn't believe the size of the base of these things. There were hundreds of massive megaliths that were totally destroyed. A lot during the 1950s, when they were trying to go towards massive agriculture and get rid of and they're right along the whole of this fault line on the Land de l'Envol, and they create a kind of barrier to the north of Carnac. And I've shown in one of my talks how the whole of the Carnac area is a perfect Feng Shui zone. I've actually superposed a plan found in a tomb in China, which dates from 2000 BC, I believe, which shows a perfect Feng Shui site. I've actually superposed that over the geography of the Carnac area, and everything fits. The rivers come down in the same way.
Wow.
The whole thing just fits over the Carnac area, as if, it might even have been a map of Carnac, So that's something which is, my take is that this is exactly what was going on. I think Feng Shui is remains. It's remains of this ancient science, quite obviously. And but like I said, it's just remains of it. The science itself seems to have been incredibly precise and very functional. And when you see the efforts they went to build Silbury Hill, its function must have been very, very important.
That's, I mean, because one of the things that, you mentioned this idea, it's almost like these legends, this folklore has elements of truth in it. This is the point. You make that point in your book. It's something that, I've been looking at as well myself, with the kind of giant lore of ancient Britain and that connection with geomancy and geodesy and the placement of sites. You mentioned the Rudston monolith. For people that don't know, that's the tallest standing stone in Britain. It's almost, I think, 26 feet tall, and potentially it goes very deep in the ground as well, some people say. And that was brought 10 miles away from the coast, apparently. And it's in a churchyard now. It towers above the church, and it's part of this whole area called the Gypsy Race, with these numerous cursuses, which all sort of almost like form triangles. But there's legends associated with that, about the devil throwing the stone at the church. And you also have sites like the Devil's Arrow, also in another part of Yorkshire, which is 3, possibly 5 stones, potentially there were, and they were thrown into place in this alignment. And so there's this almost like this ancient lore which the Christians apply to the devil, but it's probably giants before that and different elemental beings throwing these stones to mark certain positions in the landscape. And this is something that we find all over Britain. But we have the myths, we have the legends, but you're finding actual kind of scientific kind of measurement systems and layout relating to that, like Rudston, for instance. I mean, can you talk a bit about the Rudston area and how that kind of connects virtually the whole of Britain?
Yeah, well, what you were saying about the Devil's Arrows is interesting, because there's a legend there that everybody repeats, that's been repeated for centuries, about how the devil threw the stones from a place called How Hill. He was on How Hill, and he was aiming at Aldeburgh. There was a Christian community in Aldeburgh, and he was aiming at the Christian community, but it says it fell short, and they landed in Boroughbridge. The legend says, "Boroughbridge, keep out at way." There's a sort of little poem about it, But I tried to find out where How Hill was. I realized nobody really looked into where How Hill could have been. And I found this place called How Hill, which is to the south of Aldeburgh. And I discovered that, in fact, this hill, from this particular hill point to the Devil's Arrows, we have a perfect geometry of a 3-4-5 triangle to the tallest stone of the Devil's Arrows. And so the legend, and also to Aldeburgh, there's an old ancient church at Aldeburgh, and it was a perfect 45-degree angle to that church. So basically, the legend, it seems to just, seems ridiculous. But in fact, if you look into it, it's giving you the geometry. It gives you the specific spot from How Hill to the Devil's Arrows to the Aldeburgh Christian community. The whole thing is laid out, And we get the same thing at Silbury Hill, with the legend about Silbury Hill. The devil wanted to throw earth on Marlborough, but he met up with the druids from Avebury, who stopped him from doing it. And so he put all his earth at Silbury Hill. So this legend links Marlborough Mound, Silbury Hill, and Avebury together. And in the book, I show, that clearly there's geometry between the three. So to come back to Rudston, Rudston, I think, was, there was a lot more than what you can see now. and a lot of these cursuses. And it's the same kind of landscape as Avebury. It's the most northerly chalk bedrock countryside in Europe. It's exactly the same kind of geology as Avebury. So you get the winterborn streams like you get in Avebury with winterborn Moncton. You get the Kennet. The first part is what's called a winterborn stream, which it doesn't run all the time. Sometimes it's dry, and then it's linked to the level of the water in the bedrock, in the chalk bedrock. And you've got exactly the same structure in Rudston as you have in Avebury. Avebury is north-south. The Kennet runs north-south. From north of Avebury, it goes past Avebury, down past Silbury, and then turns at a right angle towards the east. In Rudston, you have exactly the same thing, what's called the Gypsy Race. It's a winterborn stream. It runs north-south down to the Rudston monolith. Then it turns and it runs off towards the east. So it's, the whole thing, the two places are very similar. And then the geometry, well, they're linked with a triple square. And I pointed out different links to Rudston. It's linked to Castle Rig, the Castle Rig monument by a triple square. It's linked to Lindisfarne. So in the book, I talk about these sacred islands. Robin Heath has talked a lot about Lundy Island, because Lundy Island is on the same latitude as Stonehenge. And I show how Lundy Island is also on a meridian, which goes from Cape Wrath down to Brittany. But Lindisfarne, the holy island of Lindisfarne, I've discovered while I was writing about the English monuments, I discovered that Lindisfarne is very important. It's a very important spot geometrically because it's perfectly due north of Silbury Hill. So if you go due north from Silbury Hill until you come to the coast, you hit Lindisfarne. And from there, a lot of things have been organized. And Castle Rig to Lindisfarne is a double square. And the fact that there was these were the oldest books in Britain were written at Lindisfarne, the Lindisfarne Gospels. And on the cover of the book, I've put a sort of extract of the pattern of you can see that's from Lindisfarne, because I discovered that in the Lindisfarne Gospels, in fact, you can actually discover the geometry used over the whole of the British Isles is actually marked out on the back of the pages of the designs in the Lindisfarne Gospels, which is incredible.
Okay.
And led me to understand that this ancient knowledge had been guarded, had been kept, and probably kept over the centuries through the Celtic tradition, and then through the Celtic Christian tradition. It's very, very important to discover that. Okay. Discovered that St. Cuthbert, who died on Lindisfarne, actually follows his. Once the Vikings had invaded, they had to leave with his coffin, which eventually ended up in Durham Cathedral, and he actually goes down this meridian line. They stayed at Chesterley Street for 7 years, which is a north-south road exactly on the meridian line. It's really quite incredible. In fact, once you start digging into the things, you discover that, it's all there. This whole history, which is today totally forgotten, who cares? But it's all still there when you look.
This is like the Druidic tradition in Britain as well. I mean, clearly that was a follow-on from the megalithic tradition, and that they were kind of, maintaining this knowledge through oral tradition and training. And obviously much of the knowledge, became encoded into myths, landscape myths. And, often they've got like numbers, clear numbers and distances and, mentions of angles across the landscape. I mean, you get that a lot in Wales with the giant Idris. He talks about triangulating and throwing stones from his sacred mountain, his seat on the top of the mountain, into triangles across the landscape. And this to me
England in French is Angleterre. It's the land of angles.
There you go. You nailed it. And so you just find all these. So with the Druids, I mean, they would have continued the tradition. You would have had the Celtic Christians continuing it further, and now we're seeing evidence, thanks to your research, that they were actually recording this in their knotwork, in their kind of designs, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, I mean, one of the other things, mentioning some of this, there's one of the sort of things that has come up quite a bit is that you use the meter a lot and kilometers in your distances. Now, this is the traditionalists like John Michel and some others, John Neal and others, who love their metrology. They can't stand the meter. They hate it. I mean, so why are you using the meter if there seems to be there's been this resistance to it, and it's not a natural measurement as such compared to the foot? But then, we were actually talking just before the interview, and actually the meter is is like 3 of a certain type of foot anyway. So
the Drusian foot,
so it all fits together. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the metrology and what got you into the way you work with the measurements?
Yeah, I've had lots of discussions with John Neal about this, and he's no longer totally hostile to the idea of the existence of the meter. Obviously, what's terrible about the meter is that it's kind of totally invading in our modern world, is that it's replacing all the ancient measurement systems, and as such, then it's detestable. I mean, it's horrendous that one system of measurement is coming in and wiping out all the rest, because each system of measurement explains different things. It's like language. You see, you have different languages, and if a language disappears, then it's a way of expressing something which disappears. Nobody's going to say, well, the Welsh language has disappeared. Doesn't matter. We can say all the same stuff in English. Obviously it does matter if a language disappears, because it's a way of thinking, and a measurement system is the same thing, exactly the same thing. Although we don't realize this now, we don't realize it because of the meter system, because the meter system has kind of invaded the whole thing. And so I can quite really readily understand why people hate the meter. They hate it as a kind of concept, as a universal measurement system, which destroys all the ancient knowledge which is transmitted through the old measurement systems. However, my study has lent me quite clearly to see, without any measure of a doubt, that the meter length was used in the far distant past. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever about it, although I have doubted about it for many, many years, because I was all on my own, basically. I was all on my own saying, the meter length, and I was going, oh, shut up. We don't want to know anything about the meter length. It's got nothing to do with the ancient metrology system. But it just happens to be there, and you can't get rid of it. And what I've discovered bit by bit is that it was introduced after the French Revolution. It was introduced. What I personally believe is that the king, Louis XVI, was actually tortured for a year, because once he'd been captured, they didn't actually kill him. They waited a year before he was executed. I wouldn't at all be surprised if he wasn't tortured for all that time until he delivered a whole number of secrets that the royalty must have known. And the meter length was handed out as if it had just been discovered by measuring a distance from Barcelona to Dunkirk. Yeah. So the measurement on the southern part from Barcelona north was in fact in error. There was a war going on, and it was very difficult to get the measurements correctly. And the man who was responsible for that part actually went into hiding because he realized he'd made mistakes, and that at the French Revolution, people could get killed for not much. I mean, if you looked in somebody in the wrong way, you could just be guillotined, And so he went into hiding because he was quite convinced that he hadn't done his job correctly. But in fact, they found him and they brought him up to Paris, and they did this big sort of ceremony about the meter length. And then they introduced the meter length, although the actual method that was supposed to have been used to have found it can quite clearly to be seen totally inadequate, which means they had the meter length before they did any of that. And in fact, I saw a documentary recently on French television about the meter length, and they actually suggest that they knew about the meter length before they actually did the measurements. Oh. And we know that Napoleon actually went into Egypt with a massive amount of soldiers, and they took the sand away from the base of the Great Pyramid, and that the meter length was actually announced once he came back. So all that's very strange. But what is quite clear now to anybody who looks into this is that the Royal Egyptian cubit that was used to build the Great Pyramid is 0.5236 meters. It's linked to the meter length because that 0.5236 is twice 2168. It's 2618. It's the golden ratio squared. And if you take that 0.5236 meters, and you multiply that by 6, you get 3.1416 pi to 4 decimal places. And that's linked to the meter length, and it can't be any other way. I've actually shown, in fact, quite clearly in a talk I've done called Carnac and the Pyramid Plan, that the distance between the bent pyramid, let's get this right, the red pyramid and Saqqara pyramid, the north-south distance, it's a 7-fold square. They're separated on an east-west measurement by exactly 1,000 meters and exactly 7,000 meters north-south. So the meter length was clearly used in Egypt, and there's no way with the evidence there is now that you can actually say it wasn't, okay. Unless you just want to forget about the actual evidence, So the question is, what was this measurement? It's given as being the 10,000th part of the distance between the North Pole and the equator, which would make that to be a distance of 40,000 kilometers, 10,000 kilometers between the North Pole and the equator. And that's not quite true. The meridian is 40,007 kilometers. And I'm quite convinced that the meter length is not that distance. That definition which is given is not the correct definition for the meter length. It's something else because it's given with incredible precision. Now, in the film, you talked about the film, the Megalithic Plan. Forgotten. What is it?
Forgotten World.
A Forgotten World. In this film, I go more into the detail of what the meter length is and what this precision measurement is, in fact. but it's definitely a very old measurement. There's no doubt about it, in my opinion.
Okay.
Right.
So it's not part of the ancient kind of canon of measurements, though.
Yes, it is. It is. In fact, there are links between. Yeah, there's a link. There are links quite clearly. Richard Heath has gone into that also in his books. There are links quite clearly between the meter length and the ancient metrological system.
Okay.
It's not totally, out. Let's talk about the megalithic yard, for example. If you look at the megalithic yard, I've shown that the megalithic yard could be given with greater precision as a meter length to 0.82944. Professor Tom said 0.829, and then when he came to Carnac, he measured between the alignments. And in his writings about Carnac, he says he's found it to be slightly longer in Carnac, and he says 8294. Now I've gone further. I'd say 82944. How on earth can I come to that kind of precision? It's because between the center of the chamber of Kerkado, I talked about Kerkado earlier. This is where I have an exhibition this year. It's the oldest cairn. It's the oldest monument in Carnac after the Tumulus Saint Michel. It's dated to 4,800 BC. A very, very old monument, and it's a central chamber. You go from the center of that chamber to the Grand Menhir, the giant standing stone. You have exactly between the two, you have 8,294.4 meters. In other words, 10,000 megalithic yards between the giant standing stone and the center of the chamber of the cairn. But I've gone even further into that. In this book, The Megalithic Plan, I show how from the center of Lundy Island up to the tip of Cape Wrath is 1 million megalithic yards, which is 829,440 meters. So, I've gone into a precision length on the megalithic yard. Now, why am I saying this? It's because 82944 as a number is 24/25 of 86400, 86,400, which is the number of seconds in a day. It's 24 times 60 times 60, 86,400. And so the megalithic yard at 82944 is that number multiplied by 24/25. So in other words, there's an exact numerical relationship between the megalithic yard and the meter. Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah, very important. And while we're on the megalithic yard, it's important as well. I don't know if people are aware in England of the work by the German metrologist, Professor. He's a German metrologist, Professor I was going to say Rottweiler, but that's the dog, isn't it? Rottinger or Rottlinger. I talk about him in my book. I give his references in my book. He has quite clearly made the link between the Nippur cubit, so the Nippur rod in copper, which gives the Nippur the Nippur cubit of 51.84 centimeters, and the megalithic yard. The megalithic rod is 2.5 megalithic yards. And in fact, the megalithic rod is exactly 4 Nippur cubits. I'm not sure if that's well known in England. This is a university metrologist, a professor, who says that there can be absolutely no doubt that the megalithic yard is linked to the Nippur cubit. Now, that's quite astounding because a lot of people just want to get rid of the megalithic yard as if it didn't exist. Whereas the Nippur cubit is, in fact, the oldest measuring rod It's dated to 2,500 BC. It's the oldest measuring rod on Earth.
Okay.
So, so the meter length actually fits into the ancient system without any doubt. But I think it was the hidden measurement. It exists in Chartres, the Chartres Cathedral, the presence of the Drusian foot, 33.3 centimeters, is quite clear in Chartres Cathedral. So obviously this measure existed long before the people from the French Revolution made it the universal measurement. I think it was the most secret. I believe it was the most secret measurement, in fact. And when it was given out as being the universal measurement, that was the kind of ultimate, what would you call it?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a polite word. It was the ultimate way of saying to, now we have the power.
Yeah. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like the rulers, the power over the land. And so,
exactly.
So this is like, if you can measure the land and take control of it as such, this is something that, is going to be noted throughout, like the Royal Mile in Edinburgh and so forth.
Yeah.
It's all about, controlling the land through the power of measurement and surveying and
also scale, doing things to scale. If you make scale models, if you have the exact measurement and you can make scale models of things, then those models can actually work like the thing itself. It's the principle of voodoo, isn't it? But if you have an exact scale model of something, then that actually gives power, which is rather, it's obviously a dangerous subject to get into. Yeah.
Because one of the things, obviously we both know Robin Heath. He discovered the sort of lunation triangle, the 5, 12, 13 triangle, not just within Stonehenge and the station stones, but also linking the Bluestone site with Stonehenge and Lundy and so forth. Yeah. He's found other 3, 4, 5 triangles as well. And you've found quite a few the same. You found more of the same exact geometry stretching across the landscape. Can you give us a couple of examples of those?
Well, the major example I'd like to give is the one linking the exact center of the Aubrey holes. So at Stonehenge, the first phase of Stonehenge, as it's given, is the Aubrey holes, the circle of the Aubrey holes. And so those Aubrey holes are perfectly well known. You can find the exact center of the Aubrey circle, which was the initial center of Stonehenge. So if you go from that point, the center of the Aubrey circle, to the center of Woodhenge has loads of concentric oval shapes. If you've got an exact central point, that's about 3,100 meters. It's over 3,100 meters away. The line linking those two centers is exactly 22.62 degrees. It's an exact angle of a 5, 12, 13 triangle with a precision of 1/100th of a degree. So anybody can check up on that. It's fact. It's not theory. This is very important, because that simple fact, if it was repeated enough, if people would just repeat enough that the center of the Aubrey circle is a perfect 5, 12, 13 triangle with the center of Woodhenge, they would have to reconsider what was going on. That cannot be a coincidence, especially when you know that the station stones, the 4 station stones at Stonehenge, are linked to the 5, 12, 13 triangle. So Stonehenge is linked, like you say, to this quarry. In fact, the new quarry, the work done on Wayne Mound, they've discovered the new quarry, or it's even better. It's an even greater precision to the 5, 12, 13 from the center of Stonehenge than the old one. So, I get rather sort of, disappointed about the fact that these simple facts, which if they were repeated enough, would be enough to totally make everybody reconsider what was going on. They're just pushed to one side, and we still consider these sort of first farmers, these ancient sort of initial peasants. That idea is incredibly sort of set into the mindset, and people just don't seem to be able to get rid of it. These things weren't being built by the first peasants. No. Silbury Hill wasn't built by accident by the first peasants. It's definitely something. I don't know if it's going to change. It's been like this for decades. Will it change one day? God knows. But there are lots of facts out there. So that's one example. Another really good example, which I gave in my talk at Megalithomania this year, is between Bryn Celtic in Anglesey, okay, another place of angles, and between Anglesey and Rudston. That's another incredible 5, 12, 13 triangle going right across the landscape. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, because one of the things that people, there's a big thing going around. We were talking about it a lot of Megalithomania. We had Mike Parker Pearson and Robin Heath and yourself speaking there. And they're always trying to work out, why was Stonehenge placed where it is? Why did they bring the blue stones from Wales? And Robin Heath has been shouting, it's because of the geometry, because of the big triangle and the lands. And it's completely ignored. I mean, only, as you mentioned, only recently, as Alexander Thom's archaeoastronomy been taken seriously, 30 or 40 years really it took for people to kind of start accepting and registering that as a reality after his profound scientific kind of accurate discoveries. So this geometry thing in the landscape is just being it's strange. It's just being so heavily ignored. It's almost like is it suppressed? Is it just because it's not understood properly? People don't have the brain capacity to kind of
but it's not very complicated.
I know. To me, it's a no-brainer. Why isn't this just accepted, as mainstream?
Well, because you have to change all the history books, basically. It's very difficult to sort of put totally into question things that have been believed, even if you have, perfect evidence for it. It's very, very difficult. But I mean, it's going to happen. It's obviously going to happen. We're going into quantum physics now. Quantum physics is starting to become very important. You get quantum or computers and things, and the quantum universe doesn't behave like our physical universe, and so loads of people are having incredible difficulty accepting that. And it's taken years and years and years for the things, but it's going to happen. It's obviously going to happen. Quantum physics is going to take over. And so things will eventually change, but it's very difficult, isn't it? Especially if you've been top of the class. If you go to school and you're top of the class, and so, you're sort of, you represent sort of all this knowledge. It's very difficult to say, well, everything I know is wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not top of the class anymore.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Yeah. So I can understand why it takes some time, but you can see it in all kinds of fields, can't you? Yeah.
Well, so I think we should I'm going to ask you one final question. This could be a long answer though. So we have these people, these ancient people building these sites, locating very precisely across the landscape. They have to go over hills they can't see the other area where the other point is. They're surveying, they're marking the geometry over huge distances, even into other countries. So how did they do it, Howard?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know, to tell you the honest truth, because the level of precision it's only since we've had GPS satellites and Google Earth and all these things that we have been able to determine this precision. So we can only understand the quality of what was done with our most recent technology. So how did they do it? Certainly, if they had the same technology as us, then it's disappeared since or gone off to some other planet. And if they didn't, then they had some sort of level of consciousness that was different to ours. Could they have possibly just been able to know where the exact spot was that they had to put something? I've often wondered if there's not some kind of, intelligence in the earth that you can get into contact with. Paul Broadhurst went into that with Hamish Miller in The Sun and the Serpent, as if there's some kind of intelligence in the earth which can actually, if you're in contact with it, can actually tell you what to do and show you what to do. So there are different possibilities. And perhaps they come down to the same thing, really. Here in France, I do courses called quadrivium courses, where we look into the basics of ancient science as it was up until the Renaissance, up until the 16th century, everything it was based on. And the basic principle of quadrivium is connecting to the higher spirit. There are 4 ways. They said quadrivium is the 4 ways, the 4 paths. And there were 4 paths to do that: via number, via geometry, via music or harmony or vibration, and via astronomy. And those 4 ways were ways of connecting to the higher spirit. In other words, as if in number itself, higher intelligence is inscribed in number itself, or in geometry, which is number expressed in space, or music, vibration, etc. And if that was it was the aim of all ancient people, ancient searchers, people who searched in ancient times, ancient Greece or Egypt, their aim was to connect to this higher spirit, to this higher intelligence through these different paths. And if a lot of people were studying in that way, then that means probably they could connect. In which case, things are a bit different. If you're connected to some kind of higher intelligence, then things are a bit different.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like the advanced geomancy, advanced Feng Shui. I mean, I know several practitioners, I'm sure you do as well, that have this intuition. They have this sort of understanding of where to place things. And sometimes, like I was involved with John Martin, actually, and Sean Kerwin, building one stone circle and one wood circle at these 2 different sites over, all around the Glastonbury area. And eventually, years later, we actually checked to see exactly where they were placed. And they were placed directly in line through the dead center of the chapel on Glastonbury Tor. And this was like pure coincidence. But somehow you just placed them there by working out other things, trying to, we actually did some, mapping and planning. So, that really woke us up to the idea that, if you're kind of following that path you mentioned, you actually can use a mixture of intuition with, ancient surveying techniques. You kind of mix it all up. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely something in there. So, yeah, a lot to think about. So, so Howard, look, thanks so much for coming on, and we really appreciate it. I want to just mention this again, the Megalithic Plan, the new book from Howard Crowhurst, and
Yeah,
obviously
it's available on Epistemia.
Yeah, and you've got
the
the
Epistemia website.
and when is the documentary coming out? When's that happening?
Well, I got a letter today. It's supposed to be coming out on Netflix. I got a letter today with the new contract. They sent me a contract. I wasn't very pleased with it. I thought it was a bit sort of... Anyway, they've sent me a new contract, which I haven't had time to read yet. But if the new contract is okay, then it should be out on Netflix in 3 or 4 months.
Brilliant. So, but the book's available now, so people can get that.
Epistemia.co.uk,
and we'll put the link in here as well.
Yeah. There you go. It's printed in a small amount of copies for the time being, and I'm looking for a publisher in Britain or the United States who would bring it out on a larger scale.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Howard. I do recommend this. This is an absolutely classic book, and Howard's lecture from Megalithomania will be available online soon. And you can check, if you check out Howard's website, you can see he's done a whole series of lectures, some in English now, and he's got many other books. He's got one on the Nebra sky disk. He's got one focused on Carnac and the alignments there.
I could show you this one, look.
Oh yeah, this is another new one.
This is a book which is in English and French. It's called Carnac, Twixt Heaven and Earth. If you want to learn about Carnac and see the different sites in Carnac, this is over 30 years of photographs that I've been taking of the moon. There you go. The moon over different megalithic sites, or the sun, different positions of the sun. And it's just gone down by 10 euros or 10 pounds. So that's, if you're interested in learning about Carnac and seeing all the photos about it, then that's on the Epistemia website as well. There you go.
All right. Well, brilliant. Okay, thanks so much, Howard. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for listening, Megalithomaniacs. We'll be back soon with some more videos, some more kind of video podcasts like we have here. And check out megalithomania.co.uk, and please subscribe, become a patron if you can, and we'll see you next time.